Commander Sarachan stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Horizon's Edge, watching the massive alien fleet approach through the viewscreen.
The Cathari vessels were impressive, she had to admit. Their ships gleamed like polished obsidian, each one the size of a small city. Energy fields rippled across their hulls in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. 47 ships confirmed, Commander, reported Lieutenant Torres from his sensor station. Each one approximately 15 kilometers in length. We're detecting massive energy signatures from what appear to be their primary weapon arrays. Sarah nodded, her expression calm despite the churning in her stomach. The Cathari had arrived at the edge of the solar system 3 days ago, broadcasting a message in broken but understandable English. They demanded Earth's immediate surrender and claimed humanity would be grateful to serve under such a magnificent and powerful civilization. "Sir, incoming transmission from the lead vessel," announced Communications Officer Reynolds.
"Put it through."
The viewscreen flickered, and suddenly Sarah found herself face to face with a being that looked like it had stepped out of humanity's worst nightmares. The Cathari admiral was tall and skeletal, with 4 arms and skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it.
Its eyes glowed with an eerie blue radiance.
"I am Admiral Vexthal of the Cathari Imperial Navy," the creature spoke, its voice a mixture of clicks and hisses that the universal translator converted into English. "I trust you are suitably impressed by the magnificence of our war fleet, primitive humans."
Sarah kept her face neutral. "I'm Commander Chan of Earth Defense. We received your message."
Admiral Vexthal's mouth twisted into what might have been a smile, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth.
"Excellent.
Then, you understand the futility of resistance. Our ships are the pinnacle of military engineering, crafted over millennia of conquest. Each vessel carries enough firepower to reduce your entire planet to ash."
"That's quite a claim," Sarah replied evenly.
"Observe," Vexthal commanded. On the screen, one of the smaller Cathari ships broke formation and moved toward a large asteroid drifting in the outer system. Energy began building along the ship's weapon arrays, creating visible distortions in space itself.
The alien vessel fired.
A beam of pure destruction lanced out, and the asteroid simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed or vaporized, it was as if the massive rock had never been there at all. "Impressive," Sarah said, though internally she was calculating the energy requirements for such a weapon.
"I assume you expect us to surrender now."
"Your species has shown remarkable adaptability for primitives," Vexthal conceded.
"The Cathari Empire can find use for clever slaves. Submit now, and your deaths will be minimal." Sarah glanced at her crew.
They were all looking at her with expressions of trust and determination. These men and women had trained for this moment their entire careers. Earth's defense fleet might be smaller than the alien armada, but they had advantages the Cathari couldn't possibly understand.
"I need to consult with my superiors," Sarah said. "Give us 1 hour."
Vexthal's glowing eyes narrowed.
"You try my patience, human. But, very well. 1 hour.
Use this time to appreciate the artistry of our vessels. Notice how they move with perfect coordination, how their hulls gleam with the power contained within. Your primitive minds may never again witness such beauty."
The transmission ended, and Sarah immediately turned to her tactical officer. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, signal the fleet. Implement Protocol 7. Morrison's fingers danced across his console.
"All ships acknowledge, Commander."
"Stealth systems are activating now." On the viewscreen, the small human fleet began to fade from view.
Their ships didn't simply disappear, they seemed to blend with the background radiation of space itself, becoming invisible to conventional sensors. "Sir," Torres called out, "the aliens are conducting detailed scans of our previous positions."
"Their sensors are incredibly sophisticated. Are they detecting us?" Sarah asked. "Negative. Our stealth technology is holding." Sarah allowed herself a small smile.
The Cathari were about to learn that humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years, and they'd gotten very good at it.
Aboard the Cathari flagship, Admiral Vexthal studied the readings from his science officers with growing irritation.
"The human ships have vanished," he demanded. "Yes, Admiral," replied his chief sensor operator, a nervous creature with 6 eyes and tentacles instead of hands. "One moment they were there, the next moment our instruments could detect nothing."
"Impossible," Vexthal snarled. "Their technology is primitive. We observed their vessels during our approach, crude metal constructions with chemical propulsion systems. How can they simply disappear?
Perhaps they fled the system, suggested Commander Zeftios, Vexthal's second in command.
Fled where?
We have the entire system surrounded.
Continue scanning.
They must be hiding behind one of the planets or moons. But, as the minutes passed, the Cathari sensors found nothing.
The human fleet had seemingly vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, Sarah Chen was coordinating with the other ship commanders through quantum-encrypted communications that the aliens couldn't even detect, let alone intercept.
"Captain Rodriguez, what's your status?" she asked. The gruff voice of the destroyer captain crackled through the calm.
"We're in position behind their formation, Commander.
These aliens are so focused on showing off their pretty ships that they haven't bothered to watch their flanks."
"Excellent. Captain Okafor?"
"My cruiser squadron is ready to implement the Macedonian gambit on your signal," came the reply from the African captain whose tactical brilliance was legendary in the Earth Defense Forces.
Sarah checked the tactical display.
The Cathari fleet was maintaining its impressive formation, clearly intended to inspire fear and awe in any who saw it. Their ships moved in perfect synchronization, energy fields pulsing in mesmerizing patterns. It would have been intimidating to a species that hadn't spent centuries perfecting the art of asymmetric warfare.
"All ships, this is Commander Chen," Sarah broadcast to her fleet. "Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth today. We're fighting for every species these aliens have enslaved over their millennia of conquest. Show them what humans do to bullies." The hour deadline was approaching.
Admiral Vexthal was growing increasingly agitated as his sensors continued to find no trace of the human ships. "Perhaps they truly did flee," Commander Zeftios suggested again.
"Their primitive vessels may have been faster than we estimated."
"No," Vexthal replied firmly. "I have studied dozens of species over my long career.
Humans are different.
They have something that most species lose when faced with overwhelming force: they have defiance." "Sir, incoming transmission from the human commander."
"Put her through."
Sarah Chen's face appeared on the screen again, and Vexthal noticed that she looked remarkably calm for someone who should be terrified. "Admiral Vexthal," she said politely.
"I've consulted with my superiors." "And, you will surrender?" "Actually, no. We decline your generous offer."
Vexthal's forearms spread wide in a gesture of disbelief.
"You decline? Did you not witness the demonstration of our power?"
"We did," Sarah replied.
"Very impressive. Would you like to see ours?" The Admiral's glowing eyes narrowed.
"Your ships have fled like cowards. What demonstration could you possibly?" His words were cut off as proximity alarms began shrieking throughout the Cathari flagship. On the tactical display, dozens of contacts suddenly appeared, not approaching from the distance, but already within the alien formation. The human ships had been there all along, invisible and waiting.
"Impossible!" Vexthal roared.
"How did the first human ship open fire?" And the Cathari admiral discovered that humans had their own definition of impressive. The human weapons weren't energy beams or exotic particles. They were simple kinetic projectiles, chunks of ultradense metal accelerated to significant fractions of light speed.
But what they lacked in exotic sophistication, they made up for in raw, devastating effect.
The first Cathari ship to be hit simply folded in on itself as the kinetic impactor punched through its shields and hull like they weren't even there.
The projectile continued through the ship's length, leaving a perfectly round hole from bow to stern. "Shields at 40%, shouted the Cathari tactical officer. "How is this possible? Their weapons should barely scratch our armor."
But Admiral Vexthal was beginning to understand.
The humans hadn't tried to match Cathari energy weapons. Instead, they'd taken a completely different approach, one that the alien shields weren't designed to handle.
"All ships, evasive maneuvers,"
Vexthal commanded. "Return fire."
The Cathari vessels began to break formation, their graceful coordination dissolving into chaos as they tried to target enemies that kept disappearing and reappearing. The human ships moved like ghosts, their one moment and gone the next, striking from unexpected angles with devastating precision. Captain Rodriguez's destroyer materialized directly beneath one of the larger alien vessels and fired a full salvo of kinetic penetrators into its unarmored belly. The Cathari ship erupted in secondary explosions as its power systems overloaded. 2 down, 45 to go, Rodriguez reported with grim satisfaction.
On the human flagship, Sarah watched the tactical display with professional interest.
The Cathari were skilled warriors, their return fire was accurate and their formations were textbook perfect. But they were fighting the last war, not this one. "Commander," Torres called out, "the aliens are adapting their shield frequencies.
They're trying to compensate for our kinetic weapons." "Let them adapt," Sarah replied. Morrison, signal Captain Okafor. "Time for Phase 2.
Across the battlefield, Captain Okafor's cruiser squadron suddenly appeared in perfect formation, but they weren't firing kinetic weapons. Instead, they launched something that looked almost primitive, simple missiles with chemical propulsion systems.
Admiral Vexthal saw the incoming missiles and actually laughed. "Chemical explosives? Against our shields? These humans are more primitive than I thought."
But his laughter died as the missiles struck his ship's shields and did exactly nothing. They simply attached themselves to the energy barriers like parasites.
"What are those devices doing?" Vexthal demanded.
His science officer's 6 eyes went wide with terror.
"Admiral, they're not explosives. They're learning. Each device is analyzing our shield harmonics and transmitting the data." Suddenly, the human kinetic weapons began hitting with even greater effect.
The attached devices had mapped the alien shields and found their weak points.
"How do they know our shield technology?" Vexthal snarled. "This is impossible."
What the Cathari admiral didn't know was that humans had been monitoring alien communications for decades. Every transmission, every tactical discussion, every technical manual that the Cathari had carelessly broadcast across subspace had been recorded and analyzed by human intelligence services.
The aliens thought they were dealing with primitives.
In reality, they were facing an enemy that had been studying them for years.
Sarah Chen watched another Cathari ship go dark as its power systems failed under kinetic bombardment.
The aliens were still dangerous, their return fire had already damaged 2 human vessels, but the tide of battle was clearly turning. "Sir, the aliens are trying to withdraw," Morrison reported.
"Let them go?" asked Torres. Sarah considered for a moment. The smart tactical decision would be to let the aliens retreat and report back to their empire.
But these beings had threatened Earth, had spoken casually about reducing the planet to ash and enslaving humanity.
More importantly, intelligence reports suggested the Cathari had already enslaved dozens of other species. Somewhere in the galaxy, entire civilizations lived under the boot of these self-proclaimed masters of war. "Negative," Sarah said firmly. "All ships, pursuit course. Today we end the Cathari Empire's expansion." Admiral Vexthal watched in growing horror as more of his ships fell to the relentless human assault.
These primitives fought like nothing he'd ever encountered, appearing from nowhere, striking with impossible precision, then vanishing before retaliation was possible. "Admiral," Commanders FTOS called out urgently, "we're receiving reports from the other fleets. Similar attacks are occurring throughout Cathari space." Vexthal's blood froze. "What do you mean?" "The humans didn't just prepare to defend their world, sir. They've launched simultaneous attacks on 17 Cathari strongholds." The Admiral's mind reeled. How was this possible? His species had been monitoring Earth for months, watching their primitive radio transmissions, observing their crude technology. How had these humans organized such a massive coordinated assault without detection? The answer was simple, though Vexthal would never learn it. While the Cathari had been watching Earth's public communications, human military forces had been using quantum entanglement networks that operated outside normal spacetime. The aliens had been monitoring the equivalent of smoke signals while missing the telephone lines buried underground. Another Cathari ship exploded as a human kinetic round found its reactor core. The alien admiral realized with growing desperation that his magnificent fleet, the pride of the Cathari Empire, was being systematically destroyed by enemies they dismissed as primitives. "All remaining ships," Vexthal commanded, "prepare for emergency jump to hyperspace." But, as the surviving Cathari vessels began powering up their faster-than-light drives, they discovered one more unpleasant surprise. The space around them had been seeded with human disruption fields. Their hyperspace engines failed to engage. The humans had thought of everything. Admiral Vexthal felt something he hadn't experienced in over 2 centuries of conquest, genuine fear. His hyperspace drives were offline, half his fleet was destroyed or disabled, and these impossible humans continued to appear and disappear like phantoms. Status report, he barked at his science officer. Sir, the disruption fields are unlike anything in our databases.
They're not generating typical interference patterns. Instead, they seem to be creating localized spacetime distortions that make hyperspace entry impossible. Vexthal's four hands clenched into fists. Spacetime manipulation was theoretical even to the Cathari. How could a primitive species have mastered such advanced physics? On the human flagship, Sarah Chen was coordinating with Admiral Patricia Nakamura, the head of Earth Defense Command, through their quantum communication link.
Excellent work, Commander, Admiral Nakamura's voice crackled through the secure channel.
Reports from other theaters are equally positive. The simultaneous strikes have caught the Cathari completely off guard. What's the status of the liberation fleets? Sarah asked while watching another alien ship succumb to focused kinetic bombardment. Captain Harrison's task force has successfully freed the Zephyrian colonies.
The aliens had enslaved them for over 50 years.
Captain Lu's squadron liberated 3 Andromedan worlds.
These species are already providing intelligence on additional Cathari positions.
Sarah nodded grimly.
Intelligence reports had revealed the true scope of Cathari cruelty. They didn't simply conquer worlds, they broke entire civilizations, turning proud species into cowering servants. The Empire had perfected psychological warfare over millennia, convincing their victims that resistance was impossible. Sir, Lieutenant Torres called out, we're receiving multiple surrender requests from damaged Cathari vessels.
Patch me through to all enemy ships, Sarah ordered.
Her image appeared on the communication screens of the surviving Cathari fleet.
Admiral Vexthal stared at the human commander with a mixture of rage and disbelief.
I am Commander Sarah Chen of the Human Liberation Fleet, she announced.
I'm offering you one chance to surrender unconditionally. Liberation Fleet?
Vexthal sputtered.
You dare name yourselves liberators?
We're liberating every world your empire has enslaved, Sarah replied calmly.
Your reign of terror ends today. Impossible. The Cathari Empire spans dozens of star systems.
You cannot have organized such a massive assault in secret. Sarah's expression remained professional, but Vexthal caught a glimpse of something in her eyes that made his blood run cold, righteous anger held under perfect control.
Admiral, your species made a fundamental error in judgment. You assumed that because our technology appeared primitive, our capabilities were limited. You thought we were just another weak civilization to be crushed. On the tactical display behind Sarah, Vexthal could see the continuing destruction of his fleet.
Human ships continued to materialize from nowhere, delivering devastating attacks before vanishing again. What you fail to understand, Sarah continued, is that humans have been fighting wars since before your species developed spaceflight. We've perfected arts of combat that you never imagined. Stealth, deception, asymmetric warfare, psychological operations, we've had thousands of years to learn. Your ships, Vexthal began.
Our ships are exactly what we wanted you to see, Sarah interrupted. Crude, primitive, unthreatening.
While you were admiring your own vessels and dismissing ours, we were studying every aspect of your technology, analyzing every weakness, preparing for this moment.
Vexthal's mind raced. The implications were staggering. You knew we were coming? We've been tracking Cathari expansion for decades.
Every species you conquered tried to send warning signals to neighboring systems. Some of those signals reached us. We've been preparing for this war since before your empire decided Earth would be your next target. The alien admiral felt his worldview crumbling. The Cathari had built their empire on the belief that they were inherently superior to other species. They'd conquered world after world through overwhelming displays of force, breaking enemy morale before the real fighting began. But these humans hadn't been intimidated by their magnificent warships. Instead, they'd seen them as targets. Your surrender offer, Vexthal said through gritted teeth.
What are your terms? Complete disarmament of all Cathari forces. Immediate release of all enslaved species. Withdrawal to your home system. War crimes tribunals for your leadership. War crimes? Vexthal's voice rose to a shriek. We are the masters. We decide what constitutes crime.
Not anymore, Sarah replied firmly.
The galaxy has new management.
Aboard the human destroyer Relentless, Captain Rodriguez was having a more personal conversation with the commander of a damaged Cathari cruiser. "You fought well, human," the alien captain admitted through the communication link. "But, you cannot understand what you're unleashing.
The Cathari Empire has maintained order in this galaxy for millennia. Without us, chaos will reign."
Rodriguez, a veteran of the Mars colonial wars, looked at the alien with undisguised contempt.
"Order? You call slavery order? We provide structure. Purpose.
The lesser species require guidance." "The lesser species," Rodriguez repeated slowly. "Let me tell you something about lesser species, bug. I've read the reports from your slave worlds. Children forced to work in your mines until they die of exhaustion. Entire populations lobotomized to make them more compliant. Scientific experiments conducted on sentient beings." The alien captain's translator conveyed his dismissive gesture. "Sacrifices necessary for the greater good of the Empire." "Well, here's some news about the greater good," Rodriguez said, his voice hard as steel.
"Humanity doesn't recognize your right to rule over anyone. Your empire dies today."
Rodriguez cut the transmission and turned to his tactical officer.
"Target their reactor core. Minimal power. I want them disabled, not destroyed."
"Sir, they're still broadcasting surrender signals."
"Then, they can surrender from a powerless Hulk," Rodriguez replied. "Maybe spending a few hours floating in space will teach them humility." The destroyer's kinetic weapons fired with surgical precision, and the Cathari cruiser went dark.
Back on the main battlefield, Admiral Vexthal was struggling with a reality that contradicted everything he'd been taught about the natural order of the universe.
"Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving updates from the homeworld. Human forces have appeared in the KETHTOS system." "What?" Vexthal spun around. "That's impossible. KETHTOS is 50 light-years from here. How could they have traveled there so quickly?" His science officer looked up from his instruments with confusion written across his features.
"Sir, according to these readings, the human forces didn't travel from here to there. They were already there when the attack began."
The implications hit Vexthal like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just defended their world and launched a counterattack.
They'd pre-positioned forces throughout Cathari space, waiting for the perfect moment to strike.
"How long?" he whispered. "Sir? How long have they been watching us?" The science officer consulted his data.
"Based on the coordination required for simultaneous attacks across 17 systems, years, Admiral.
Perhaps decades." Vexthal sank into his command chair. "Decades."
The humans had been planning this war for decades, studying Cathari tactics, infiltrating their space, preparing their assault.
And, the entire time, the Cathari leadership had dismissed them as primitives. On the human side, the battle was proceeding exactly according to plan. Years of preparation, intelligence gathering, and strategic positioning were paying off.
"Commander," Morrison reported, "Admiral Vexthal's flagship is signaling unconditional surrender."
Sarah studied the tactical display.
23 Cathari ships remained operational out of the original 47, and most of those were heavily damaged.
"Accept their surrender," she ordered. "Begin recovery operations for survivors." "And, Morrison?" "Yes, sir?" "Make sure our medical teams understand that we treat prisoners with dignity.
I want these aliens to see the difference between human justice and Cathari oppression."
"Understood, Commander." As human rescue ships moved to collect survivors from the destroyed alien vessels, Sarah received another communication from Admiral Nakamura. "Commander, I'm getting reports from across the theater. The Cathari Empire is collapsing faster than we projected." "How so?"
"It turns out that their enslaved species were ready for this moment. As soon as they saw Cathari forces being defeated, rebellions broke out on dozens of worlds. The Empire's own subjects are rising up to join us."
Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction.
This was what they'd hoped for but hadn't dared count on. The Cathari had ruled through fear, convincing their subjects that resistance was hopeless. But, once that illusion was shattered, their empire would crumble from within.
"What about our casualty reports?" Sarah asked. "Remarkably light.
The stealth technology and intelligence advantages gave us incredible tactical superiority. We've lost some ships, but crew casualties are minimal thanks to the escape pod protocols.
Sarah nodded. Human military doctrine emphasized preservation of life above all else.
Every ship was equipped with advanced escape systems, and every battle plan included provisions for rescuing survivors, both human and enemy.
It was another difference between humans and the Cathari. The aliens saw their crews as expendable resources. Humans saw every life as irreplaceable.
Admiral Vexthal found himself aboard a human rescue vessel, receiving medical treatment for injuries sustained when his flagship was disabled. The human medical officer treating him was polite, professional, and thorough.
Why? Vexthal asked as the human checked his alien physiology against a database that somehow already contained detailed Cathari biological information. Why what? The medic asked. Why are you helping me? I am your enemy. I threatened your world.
The medic looked at him with an expression Vexthal had never seen before, not hatred, not fear, not even disgust.
Something else. Something that might have been pity. Because you're injured, the medic said simply. That's what we do. Vexthal stared at the human.
In Cathari society, wounded enemies were left to die or finished off as an act of mercy.
The concept of treating enemy wounded was alien to him.
You are weak, he said, though the words carried no conviction. Maybe, the medic replied, continuing his work. But our weakness just defeated your strength.
Makes you wonder which is really which, doesn't it? Throughout Cathari space, similar scenes were playing out. Human forces weren't just winning battles, they were demonstrating a completely different approach to warfare. Prisoners were treated well. Civilians were protected. Infrastructure was preserved rather than destroyed. The enslaved species watching these battles were seeing something they'd never imagined possible, conquerors who showed mercy. On the bridge of the human flagship, Sarah was reviewing reports from across the combat zone when Lieutenant Torres approached with a concerned expression. Commander, we're receiving a priority transmission from deep space.
It's using Cathari encryption, but the message is in English.
Sarah frowned. Put it through.
The view screen activated, revealing a being that looked similar to the Cathari but somehow different.
This creature's skin had a more metallic sheen, and its eyes burned with golden light instead of blue. I am High Admiral Kethvar of the Imperial Core Fleet, the being announced. You have made a grave error, humans. Have we? Sarah replied evenly.
The forces you have defeated were merely our frontier legions, expendable troops sent to test your capabilities. Now that we understand your tactics, the true Cathari war machine will respond. Sarah felt her crew tense around her, but she kept her own expression neutral. They'd known this was a possibility. Intelligence suggested the Cathari Empire had multiple fleet tiers, with the most advanced ships held in reserve.
How many ships are you bringing? Sarah asked. High Admiral Kethvar's mouth twisted into a predatory smile. 300 vessels of the Imperial Core Fleet. Ships that make Admiral Vexthal's forces look like toys. We are the elite of the elite, armed with weapons that can crack planets. Impressive, Sarah said. When should we expect you?
The alien admiral seemed taken aback by her calm response.
You are not afraid? Should I be? Our approach will be different from Vexthal's crude assault. We will not underestimate human cunning.
We will not be deceived by your primitive appearance.
We will bring overwhelming force and use it without mercy. Sarah nodded thoughtfully.
That sounds like a solid tactical approach.
Thank you for the warning. Warning? Kethvar sputtered. It was not a warning. It was a promise of your destruction. I see. Well, we'll be ready for you.
The transmission ended, and Sarah immediately turned to her communications officer.
Signal Admiral Nakamura. Tell her to implement Protocol Omega. Sir, Morrison said quietly, Protocol Omega is.
I know what it is, Commander.
And I know what it means.
Around the bridge, her crew exchanged glances.
Protocol Omega was humanity's final contingency plan. The one they'd hoped never to use. Admiral Vexthal, still receiving medical treatment in the human sickbay, had overheard the transmission. He looked at his human medic with something that might have been concern. You do not understand, he said urgently. Kethvar commands the Imperial Core Fleet. They have never been defeated.
Their ships are armed with quantum disruptors that can unravel matter at the subatomic level. The human medic continued his work calmly.
Sounds dangerous. They will show no mercy. Kethvar considers compassion to be weakness. He will not just defeat you, he will make examples of your worlds. The medic looked up from his instruments. Admiral, can I ask you something? What? In all your centuries of conquest, did any species ever surprise you the way we did today? Vexthal considered the question. No. Never. Then, maybe you should consider the possibility that you don't know humans as well as you think you do.
The medic returned to his work, leaving Vexthal to contemplate the implications. These humans had somehow orchestrated the destruction of an empire that had stood for millennia. They'd done it with technology that appeared primitive but functioned with devastating effectiveness. They'd turned what should have been a simple conquest into a coordinated liberation campaign across dozens of star systems. And now they were calmly preparing to face forces that even the Kethari considered elite. Perhaps, Vexthal thought with growing unease, High Admiral Kethvar was about to learn the same lessons he had. The hard way. High Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, Dominion's Edge, watching the tactical display with cold satisfaction. 300 ships of the Imperial Core Fleet moved in perfect formation through hyperspace, each vessel a masterpiece of Kethari military engineering. Unlike the frontier legions that had suffered such humiliating defeat at human hands, the Core Fleet represented the absolute pinnacle of the Empire's military might. These ships had been built in the secret shipyards of the Imperial homeworld, armed with weapons that existed nowhere else in Kethari space.
Status report, Kethvar commanded.
All ships report full readiness, High Admiral, replied his tactical coordinator, a scarred veteran named Zekmoth who had served in the Core Fleet for over a century. Quantum disruptor arrays are charged and synchronized.
Reality anchor systems are online. Temporal displacement fields are stable. Kethvar nodded with approval.
These humans had demonstrated cunning and unconventional tactics, but they would find the Core Fleet to be a very different opponent than Vexthal's force.
What is our intelligence on human defensive preparations? Kethvar asked.
His intelligence officer, a pale creature with 6 arms and multifaceted eyes, consulted its datapad.
Sensor networks indicate significant movement throughout human space, High Admiral.
They appear to be positioning their entire fleet to defend their homeworld. Foolish, Kethvar said with contempt. They concentrate their forces, making our task easier. We will annihilate their fleet in one decisive battle, then reduce their world to component atoms. Sir, Zekmoth interjected carefully, perhaps we should consider the possibility that this concentration is deliberate. The humans demonstrated remarkable tactical sophistication in their previous engagement.
Kethvar's golden eyes flared with anger. Are you suggesting the Core Fleet should fear these primitives? Not fear, sir. Caution.
The humans defeated a full frontier legion using tactics we had never encountered.
Perhaps enough. Kethvar roared.
The frontier legions were weak, complacent from centuries of easy conquest. The Core Fleet has maintained constant readiness. Our weapons are beyond anything these humans have encountered. Our strategies are perfected through millennia of warfare against peer opponents. The bridge fell silent. Kethvar was known throughout the Empire for his tactical brilliance, but also for his absolute intolerance of doubt or hesitation.
Meanwhile, in the Sol system, humanity was indeed preparing for the greatest battle in its history. But Admiral Nakamura's preparations were unlike anything the Kethari could have imagined. Final status on Operation Prometheus, she asked during the Emergency Council meeting aboard Earth's Orbital Command Station. All Phase 1 assets are in position, reported General Hassan, commander of Earth's ground-based defenses. The quantum foundries are operating at maximum capacity. Phase 2? Nakamura queried.
The deep space platforms are online and synchronized, answered Admiral Park, head of the Outer System Defense Grid.
All test firings have been successful. And Phase 3?
Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the brilliant physicist who had led humanity's most classified research projects, leaned forward.
The theoretical framework is sound. We've run the calculations thousands of times. But, Admiral, once we activate the Phase 3 protocols, there's no going back. Nakamura nodded grimly.
Protocol Omega had been developed in absolute secrecy over the past decade, based on theoretical physics that pushed the boundaries of known science. It was humanity's ultimate deterrent, designed to be used only if the very survival of the species was at stake.
How long until the Cathari arrive? Nakamura asked.
6 hours, replied her intelligence chief.
Their fleet is maintaining standard hyperspace velocity.
Then, we have time for final preparations. Signal all commands, implement Phase 1 immediately.
Throughout human space, installations that had been disguised as research stations and mining operations began revealing their true purpose.
The asteroid mining platforms in the belt turned out to be massive kinetic weapon foundries, capable of producing millions of guided projectiles in real time. The scientific research installations hidden throughout the outer system activated advanced sensor arrays that could track individual ships. High Admiral Kethvar found himself in a position no Cathari commander had ever experienced. His empire was surrendering around him while he sat powerless in space, his mighty fleet drained of energy and under constant bombardment. Sir, Zekmoth said quietly, we're receiving direct communication requests from 17 of our ship commanders.
They're asking for permission to surrender individually. Kethvar felt his worldview crumbling.
The Imperial Core Fleet had been the backbone of Cathari military might for over 1,000 years.
These ships and crews represented the absolute elite of their civilization. The idea that they would even consider surrender was unthinkable. Denied, he snarled. We are Cathari. We do not surrender.
But, even as he spoke the words, Kethvar could see the doubt in his officer's eyes. The energy drain weapons were slowly crippling his fleet, and the constant kinetic bombardment was taking its toll on ship systems. On the human command ship, Sarah was coordinating with Admiral Harrison, who was leading the diplomatic mission to the Cathari homeworld.
What's the situation planetside? Sarah asked.
Better than we hoped, Harrison replied through the quantum link. The old Imperial government fell within hours of receiving news about the fleet defeats. The new Provisional Council is led by Cathari intellectuals and reformers who've been working underground for decades.
They want to reform the Empire? More than that. They want to dismantle it entirely.
Apparently there's been a significant anti-imperial movement within Cathari society for generations.
Our victories gave them the courage to act. Sarah nodded thoughtfully.
Human intelligence had suspected there might be dissent within the Empire, but the scale of internal opposition was surprising.
What are their demands? She asked. Complete democratization of all Cathari worlds. Immediate release of all enslaved species. Reparations for conquered civilizations. And, here's the interesting part, they want to join the new galactic alliance we're proposing. Join us? The Provisional Council is made up of Cathari who've been studying human philosophy and governance for years. They're fascinated by concepts like individual rights, democratic representation, and international law. Sarah felt a surge of hope. If this was genuine, it meant the war could end not with the destruction of a species, but with their transformation into allies. But first, she had to deal with High Admiral Kethvar and his core fleet. Admiral Kethvar, Sarah said, opening a communication channel to the alien flagship. I think it's time we had a serious conversation. The High Admiral's image appeared on her screen, and Sarah could see the strain in his alien features. His golden eyes had lost their arrogant gleam and now burned with desperate defiance. I will not surrender, he declared immediately. The Imperial Core Fleet fights until the end. That's your choice, Sarah replied calmly. But, I thought you should know, your homeworld has already surrendered. Kethvar's expression shifted from defiance to shock. Impossible. The Provisional Council signed a comprehensive peace treaty 30 minutes ago. The Cathari Empire officially ceased to exist as of 1700 hours, Galactic Standard Time. You lie. Sarah gestured to her communications officer, who patched through a direct feed from the homeworld. The image showed Cathari civilians celebrating in the streets while human and allied ships maintained peaceful orbit overhead. The new Cathari government is calling for all military forces to stand down and return home, Sarah continued. They're offering amnesty to any personnel who participated in imperial expansion under orders. Kethvar stared at the images of his own people celebrating what they saw as liberation. It was a sight that challenged every assumption he'd held about his species and their empire. We brought order to the galaxy, he whispered. We provided structure, purpose, civilization. You brought slavery, Sarah replied firmly but without anger. You conquered free peoples and broke their spirits. But that's over now. And what happens to us? Kethvar asked, gesturing to his fleet. Do you expect warriors to become farmers and merchants? We expect you to become whatever you choose to become, Sarah said. The new Galactic Alliance will need peacekeepers, explorers, defenders. If you want to remain military personnel, you can serve in the Allied fleet. If you want to return to civilian life, you'll be helped to reintegrate. Kethvar looked at her as if she were speaking in an alien language. You would trust former enemies with military responsibilities? Why not? You're skilled officers and experienced warriors. The galaxy will be a better place if that experience is used to protect people instead of enslaving them. The concept was so foreign to Kethvar that he struggled to process it. In Kethari society, defeated enemies were either killed or enslaved. The idea of offering them partnership was unprecedented. You realize, he said slowly, that some of my officers have committed what you would consider war crimes. Yes, Sarah acknowledged. And those individuals will face justice. But justice doesn't mean vengeance. It means truth, accountability, and healing for the victims. Aboard one of the core fleet vessels, Commander Thexanael was having his own crisis of faith. He'd served in the Imperial military for 80 years, participating in dozens of conquest campaigns. The idea that his entire career had been built on wrongdoing was difficult to accept. Commander, his tactical officer said quietly, we're receiving individual surrender offers from the human fleet. They're guaranteeing safe passage to any ship that stands down. Thexanael studied the tactical display. His vessel was nearly powerless, surrounded by enemies he couldn't effectively target. Continuing to fight would accomplish nothing except the deaths of his crew. What kind of surrender terms? He asked. Full crew amnesty pending individual review. Medical care for wounded personnel. Repatriation to the homeworld or service in the Allied fleet for those who request it. These terms were far more generous than anything the Kethari Empire had ever offered defeated enemies. Thexanael found himself wondering if his human opponents were naive or simply operating from a completely different moral framework. Sir, his tactical officer prompted. Thexanael made a decision that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. Signal the human fleet. We accept their surrender terms. Similar scenes were playing out across the core fleet as individual commanders reached the same conclusion. The fight was hopeless, and continuing would serve no purpose except pride. High Admiral Kethvar watched his fleet disintegrate around him as ship after ship accepted human surrender terms. Within 2 hours, only 12 vessels remained loyal to his command. Sir, Zekmoth said gently, perhaps it's time. Time for what? Time to accept that the empire we serve no longer exists. Time to consider what comes next. Kethvar looked around his bridge at officers who had served with him for decades. These beings had devoted their lives to the Kethari Empire, believing they were bringing civilization to a chaotic galaxy. Do you believe them? He asked quietly. The humans, I mean. Do you believe their promises about justice and partnership? Zekmoth considered the question carefully. Sir, everything they've done has contradicted our understanding of how conquerors behave. They treat prisoners well. They offer mercy to defeated enemies. They seem genuinely interested in reform rather than revenge. It could be deception. It could be. But, sir, what alternative do we have? Our empire is gone. Our homeworld has surrendered. We can fight to the death for a cause that no longer exists, or we can try to build something better. Kethvar stared at the tactical display, watching human ships maintaining defensive positions around his remaining vessels. They weren't pressing their attack, despite having overwhelming advantage. They were giving him time to make his decision. Signal Commander Chen, he said finally. I want to discuss terms. Sarah wasn't surprised when the communication request came through. She'd been watching the tactical situation and knew Kethvar was out of options. Admiral, she said when his image appeared. Have you reached a decision? I have conditions, Kethvar said stiffly. Let's hear them. My remaining crew members are to be treated with the same respect as your own personnel. No summary executions, no torture, no collective punishment. Agreed. Any officers accused of war crimes are to receive fair trials with proper legal representation. Of course. And I want your personal guarantee that you will investigate the conditions on worlds that the Empire conquered. If our rule was truly as harsh as you claim, I want to see the evidence. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You're asking us to prove that your empire committed atrocities? I'm asking for truth, Kethvar replied. If I'm to accept that everything I believed was wrong, I need to understand why. Sarah nodded slowly. The High Admiral was struggling with cognitive dissonance on a massive scale. Having his worldview shattered was probably as traumatic as physical injury. I can arrange for you to visit liberated worlds and speak with survivors, Sarah offered. You can see the evidence for yourself. And if I find that our rule was justified? Then, you'll have learned something important about perspective and truth, Sarah replied diplomatically. Kethvar made his decision. Very well. I surrender my fleet unconditionally to the human defense forces. The formal surrender took place aboard the human flagship Defiant 6 hours later. High Admiral Kethvar, accompanied by his senior officers, formally transferred command of the Imperial Core Fleet to Commander Sarah Chen. The ceremony was witnessed by representatives from dozens of species, many of them former Kethari slaves who had volunteered to serve in the Allied fleet. This is historic, Admiral Nakamura observed as she watched the proceedings. The first time in recorded galactic history that an empire has been conquered through a combination of military force and moral persuasion. Dr. Warren, who was monitoring communications from across the galaxy, looked up from her instruments. Admiral, you need to see this. We're receiving applications to join the Galactic Alliance from over 200 star systems. 200? Species that have been neutral for centuries are asking to join us. Apparently, word of how we've handled this war has spread faster than lightspeed communications should allow. Sarah smiled as she accepted the formal surrender document from Kethvar. The High Admiral looked like a being who had lost everything, but she hoped he would eventually understand that he'd actually been freed from a burden he'd carried unknowingly. What happens now? Kethvar asked as the ceremony concluded. Now we build something better, Sarah replied. A galaxy where species cooperate instead of dominating each other. Where conflicts are resolved through negotiation rather than conquest. Where everyone has a voice in their own future. And if someone threatens this new order? Sarah's expression hardened slightly. Then, they'll learn what happened to the Kethari Empire. The hard way. That evening, in the officers' mess aboard the Defiant, former enemies sat together sharing meals and stories. Human officers found themselves fascinated by Kethari military traditions, while alien personnel marveled at human concepts of individual rights and democratic governance. Admiral Vexthal, the Kethari commander who had been captured in the first battle, sat with Captain Rodriguez discussing the fundamental differences between human and Kethari military philosophy. Your species fights differently, Vexthal observed. Not just tactically, but philosophically. You seem to believe that war should serve peace. That's exactly right, Rodriguez replied. We don't fight to conquer or dominate. We fight to protect what we value and to make fighting unnecessary in the future. A strange concept, Vexthal mused. But perhaps not an unwise one. Across the mess hall, Dr. Warren was explaining human scientific methodology to a group of fascinated Kethari engineers. The aliens were particularly interested in humanity's collaborative approach to research and development. So different species work together on scientific projects, one engineer asked. All the time, Dr. Warren replied. Some of our greatest discoveries have come from combining different perspectives and approaches to problems. In our empire, each species was assigned specific roles based on our assessment of their capabilities, the engineer said thoughtfully. Perhaps we missed opportunities for innovation. Perhaps, Dr. Warren agreed diplomatically. But that's the beauty of the new alliance, everyone gets to contribute their unique strengths. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself in conversation with High Admiral Kethvar, who seemed to be struggling with profound philosophical questions. I've been thinking about what you said, Kethvar told her. About visiting the worlds we conquered. I'm not certain I'm ready to see what you claim we did to those populations. Why not? Because if you're right, if our empire truly was built on suffering, then my entire life has been dedicated to evil. Sarah considered her response carefully. Admiral, evil requires intent. Most of your people probably believed they were bringing order and civilization to primitive worlds. Intent matters. Does it? It matters for the future. People who realize they've been wrong can choose to do better. People who never question their actions never grow. Kethvar was quiet for a long moment. Your species is very different from ours. How so? You seem to believe that anyone can change, that redemption is possible. Most species write off their enemies as irredeemable.
Maybe that's why most species keep fighting the same wars over and over, Sarah suggested.
We prefer to turn enemies into allies.
As the night wore on, similar conversations were taking place throughout the ship. Former adversaries were discovering common ground, shared interests, and mutual respect. It was, Sarah reflected, exactly what humanity had hoped to achieve when they began planning this war decades earlier. Not the destruction of an enemy, but the transformation of a galaxy where might made right into one where right made might. 6 months after the surrender of the Imperial Core Fleet, High Admiral Kethvar stood on the observation deck of the human research vessel New Horizon, watching the planet Zephyria Prime rotate slowly beneath them. This was his third visit to a former Kethari colony world, and each visit had been more devastating to his worldview than the last. "Are you ready to go down to the surface?" asked Dr. Martinez, the human xenopsychologist who had been accompanying him on these visits.
Kethvar's forehands clenched and unclenched nervously. "I'm not certain I'll ever be ready. But, yes, let's proceed."
The shuttle ride to the surface was quiet. Kethvar stared out the viewport at a world he remembered as a model of Kethari efficiency, mining operations that extracted valuable minerals while the native population provided organized labor under imperial supervision. What he saw now was completely different. The Zephyrians had rebuilt their cities according to their own architectural preferences instead of the standardized imperial designs. Children played in parks that had been mining sites. Art and music filled spaces that had once echoed with the sound of industrial machinery. "It's so chaotic," Kethvar observed as they landed in the capital city.
"Is it?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Or is it alive?"
They were met by Zexandra, a Zephyrian who had survived the Imperial occupation and now served as a cultural liaison for the new Galactic Alliance.
"High Admiral Kethvar," Zexandra said, her translator converting her melodic native language into standard Galactic. "I understand you wish to learn about our experiences under Imperial rule."
Kethvar studied the being before him. Zexandra was tall and graceful, with iridescent scales that shifted color with her emotions.
Currently, those scales showed a pattern he didn't recognize.
"I was told you requested to speak with me specifically," Kethvar said.
"Why?"
"Because 40 years ago, you personally oversaw the conquest of this world," Zexandra replied calmly.
"I was there when your ships arrived." The High Admiral felt his stomach drop.
He remembered the Zephyria campaign. It had been early in his career, one of his first major commands. He'd been proud of how efficiently they'd subdued the population with minimal casualties.
"I remember," he said quietly.
"We offered your people the benefits of imperial citizenship in exchange for cooperation." "You offered us slavery in exchange for survival," Zexandra corrected, though her tone remained calm.
"Would you like to see what that looked like?" They walked through the city, and Zexandra showed him memorials that had been erected after liberation.
Each one commemorated Zephyrians who had died under imperial rule, some from overwork in the mines, others from malnutrition when food was redirected to feed the occupation forces, still others from despair when their children were taken to serve in imperial institutions. "This memorial contains the names of my parents," Zexandra said, stopping before a crystalline structure that hummed with soft music.
"They died in your mines when I was 12 years old."
Kethvar stared at the memorial, reading names in a flowing script he couldn't translate but somehow understood represented individual lives, individual tragedies.
I
was told that working conditions were humane," he said weakly. "The reports from the planetary governors indicated acceptable casualty rates."
"Acceptable to whom?" Zexandra asked.
The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Kethvar realized he'd never actually asked what was acceptable to the people being governed.
"How many?" he whispered. "On this world alone?"
Nearly 2 million Zephyrians died during the 40 years of occupation. Most from preventable causes: disease, malnutrition, industrial accidents, despair. Kethvar felt his legs give out, and he sat heavily on a nearby bench.
2 million deaths.
And this was just one world out of dozens he'd conquered. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked.
"Why not simply execute me for war crimes?" Zexandra's scales shifted to a pattern that somehow conveyed sadness mixed with hope. Because the humans taught us something important, that understanding is more powerful than vengeance. Understanding? You need to understand what your empire really did so that you can help ensure it never happens again. Hatred would serve no one. Knowledge might serve everyone. They spent the rest of the day visiting schools, hospitals, and cultural centers that had been built where imperial facilities once stood. Everywhere they went, Zephyrians told their stories, not with anger or hatred, but with a determined commitment to ensuring future generations understood the importance of freedom. That evening, back aboard the New Horizon, Kethvar sat alone in his quarters, reviewing reports he'd written 40 years earlier. Reading them now, with new understanding, was like discovering they'd been written by a stranger. Efficient extraction of mineral resources, read one report. Native population adapting well to industrial work schedules. He remembered being proud of those words. Now they made him sick. A chime at his door interrupted his dark thoughts. "Enter," he called. Commander Sarachan walked in, carrying a datapad and 2 cups of something that smelled vaguely like tea. "Thought you might want some company," she said, offering him one of the cups. Kethvar accepted the drink gratefully. Over the past months, he'd developed an unexpected respect for the human commander who had defeated his fleet. "I read my old reports today," he said without preamble. "Reports from the Zephyria occupation. And they're accurate, from a purely statistical standpoint. Production quotas met, population compliance achieved, minimal active resistance. But they're also completely wrong about everything that matters." Sarah sat down across from him. "How so?" "They measure efficiency instead of suffering. Compliance instead of dignity. They reduce sentient beings to numbers in a spreadsheet." "That's not uncommon," Sarah said gently. "Military commanders throughout history have had to make decisions based on incomplete information. The key is learning to ask better questions." Kethvar looked up at her with something that might have been hope. "What questions should I have been asking? What do the people want? What do they need? How can we help them build better lives? What are we destroying in the name of order?" "Those questions were never part of my training." "They are now," Sarah said. "The new Galactic Alliance is developing military academies that teach officers to think about the human cost of their decisions." "And you want me to help design these academies?" Sarah nodded. "You understand Imperial military thinking better than anyone. You know how officers are trained to see conquest as civilization. That knowledge could help us train a new generation to see protection as the highest military virtue." Kethvar was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about something Zexandra said. She talked about understanding being more powerful than vengeance. Is that really how your species thinks?" "It's how we try to think," Sarah corrected. "We're not perfect. We have our own history of warfare and oppression. But we've learned that cycles of revenge never end unless someone chooses to break them. And if I help you design these academies, if I share everything I know about Imperial tactics and psychology, what guarantee do I have that your alliance won't become the next empire?" Sarah smiled. "None whatsoever. That's why we need people like you watching us, questioning our decisions, reminding us what we're trying not to become." The conversation was interrupted by an emergency communication from Admiral Nakamura. "Commander Chen, we have a situation developing in the Outer Rim territories. A species called the Hegemony has been observing the fall of the Kethari Empire and has decided this would be an excellent time to begin their own expansion." Sarah frowned. "Details?" "They've attacked 3 systems in the past week. Their technology appears to be roughly equivalent to pre-war Kethari levels, but their tactics are completely different. Instead of conquest, they seem focused on extermination." Kethvar leaned forward with interest. "The Hegemony? I know that species. They've been isolationist for centuries, building up their forces while avoiding contact with other civilizations. What can you tell us about them?" Sarah asked. "They're fanatics," Kethvar replied grimly. "They believe that the galaxy belongs to them by divine right and that all other species are abominations that must be cleansed. Unlike the Kethari Empire, which sought to rule other species, the Hegemony wants to eliminate them entirely." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The Galactic Alliance was still forming, many member species were still recovering from Kethari occupation, and now they faced a completely new threat. Admiral Nakamura, what are our response options? Limited.
Most of our fleet is scattered across former Imperial space, helping with reconstruction and peacekeeping operations. We could assemble a task force, but it would take weeks to coordinate.
Kethvar stood up suddenly. Commander Chen, I have a proposal. I'm listening. The surviving ships of the Imperial Core Fleet, the ones that surrendered to you. Their crews have been undergoing retraining and integration into the Alliance fleet structure. Yes?
We're ready for combat operations. And we know hegemony technology and tactics from pre-war intelligence files.
Let us prove that the new alliance can turn former enemies into effective allies. Sarah studied the alien admiral carefully. You're volunteering to lead former Cathari ships into battle to defend species that your empire once enslaved?
I'm volunteering to do what I should have done 40 years ago, use military force to protect the innocent instead of enslaving them. Admiral Nakamura's voice crackled through the calm. Commander, the Alliance Council is requesting immediate response options.
Time is critical.
Sarah made her decision. Admiral Nakamura, please inform the Council that we're deploying a joint task force under combined human and Cathari command.
Admiral Kethvar will serve as strategic advisor. Acknowledged. And, Commander?
The symbolic importance of this deployment hasn't escaped the Council's attention.
Former Cathari ships defending former Cathari victims could be exactly the message the galaxy needs to see. 3 days later, the joint task force emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the hegemony's latest target system. The fleet composition told a story that would have been impossible to imagine a year earlier: human vessels flying alongside former Imperial ships, with crews that included dozens of species working together. All ships report ready, announced Captain Rodriguez from his position aboard the refitted Cathari cruiser Redemption. The irony of the name isn't lost on anyone, Commander. Sarah smiled from her position on the Joint Command Ship Unity. Admiral Kethvar, what's the tactical situation? Kethvar studied the sensor displays with professional interest.
The hegemony fleet is positioned in high orbit around the fourth planet, a world populated by the Meridian species. Based on their formation, they're preparing for planetary bombardment.
How long until they begin the attack?
Hegemony doctrine calls for 48 hours of psychological warfare before actual bombardment begins. They broadcast horrific images and threats to break the population's will to resist. Sarah felt her jaw clench.
Not on our watch.
All ships, battle stations.
We're going in. The joint task force accelerated toward the inner system, and the hegemony fleet quickly detected their approach.
The alien ships were sleek and angular, their hulls a deep black that seemed to absorb light. Incoming transmission from the hegemony fleet commander, reported the communications officer.
Put it through.
The being that appeared on the screen was unlike any alien Sarah had encountered. The hegemony commander appeared to be made of some kind of metallic substance, with eyes that glowed like white-hot stars. I am Destroyer Vex Kane of the Hegemony Purification Fleet, the creature announced in a voice like grinding metal. You interfere with the sacred cleansing of this system.
Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. I'm Commander Chen of the Galactic Alliance, Sarah replied evenly. You're attacking a peaceful civilization. Stand down immediately. Vex Kane's metallic features twisted into what might have been amusement. The Galactic Alliance? The mongrel collection of inferior species that somehow managed to defeat the decadent Cathari Empire? Among others, yes. Impossible. Our intelligence indicates that your forces are scattered across hundreds of systems. You cannot have assembled a fleet capable of challenging us. Sarah gestured to her tactical display, which showed the Joint Task Force's true strength. Would you like to reconsider that assessment? For the first time, Vex Kane looked uncertain. Those ship configurations, some of those are former Imperial vessels. Correct. Cathari ships with Cathari crews, fighting alongside the species they once oppressed to defend innocent people from fanatics like you. The concept was so alien to hegemony thinking that Vex Kane actually recoiled. Abomination. Species do not cooperate, they conquer or are conquered. You're about to learn otherwise, Sarah replied, and cut the transmission. The battle that followed demonstrated the power of cooperation over fanaticism. Human ships used their stealth technology and kinetic weapons to strike from unexpected angles, while former Cathari vessels provided heavy firepower and served as mobile command platforms for coordinated strikes.
But the real surprise came from the crews themselves. On the bridge of the refitted Redemption, Captain Rodriguez was coordinating with Cathari tactical officers who had once served under Cathvar. Their combined knowledge of human and imperial tactical doctrine created strategies that neither species could have developed alone. Target their command ship's power grid, suggested Commander Thexanal, the former Cathari officer who now served as Rodriguez's executive officer. Hegemony ships become vulnerable to boarding actions if their internal defenses lose power. Good thinking, Rodriguez replied.
Human boarding teams are standing by.
The hegemony fleet fought with desperate fury, but they were unprepared for enemies who combined multiple tactical traditions and technologies. Within 6 hours, the alien fleet was either destroyed or forced to withdraw. As the Joint Task Force secured orbit around the threatened planet, Sarah received a communication from the Meridian planetary government.
Commander Chen, said the grateful Meridian leader, we cannot adequately express our gratitude.
To be saved by the very ships that once threatened our neighbors, it gives us hope that the galaxy truly is changing.
That's the idea, Sarah replied. The alliance isn't just about military cooperation, it's about proving that former enemies can become trusted friends.
Later, as the task force prepared to return to human space, Admiral Cathvar found himself on the observation deck of the Unity, staring out at the stars with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in decades.
Thinking about the future? Sarah asked, joining him at the viewport.
Thinking about the past and the future, Cathvar replied. 6 months ago, I commanded ships that enslaved civilizations.
Today, I helped save one. How does it feel? Cathvar considered the question carefully. Different.
Better. For the first time in my military career, I feel like I'm fighting for something worthwhile instead of just fighting for victory. That's what we hoped would happen, Sarah said. When we designed this war, our goal was never to destroy the Cathari. It was to transform them.
Transform us into what? Into partners. Into allies.
Into beings who use their strength to protect others instead of dominating them.
Cathvar nodded slowly. I believe we're beginning to understand.
But it will take time to fully change patterns of thought that have existed for millennia.
We have time, Sarah said. And we have patience. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen.
As the Joint Task Force jumped to hyperspace, heading home to report on their successful mission, neither Sarah nor Cathvar could have imagined that this would be remembered as the moment when the Galactic Alliance truly began. Not with the defeat of an empire, but with the redemption of its former soldiers.
In the months and years that followed, the model established by the Joint Task Force would be replicated across the galaxy.
Former enemies working together, species that had been isolated for centuries joining the alliance, and military forces dedicated to protection rather than conquest. The universe, it turned out, had been waiting for someone to prove that cooperation was stronger than domination, that understanding was more powerful than force, and that even the most dedicated warriors could choose to become protectors instead of conquerors. Humanity had shown the galaxy a new way to resolve conflicts, not by destroying enemies, but by transforming them into allies. It was a lesson that would echo across the stars for generations to come, establishing a peace built not on fear or submission, but on mutual respect and shared purpose. The Cathari Empire was gone, but something far better had taken its place, a galaxy where might served right, where diversity was strength, and where every species had the opportunity to contribute to a better future for all. Admiral Vexthal, now serving as an instructor at the new Galactic Military Academy, often told his students that the humans had taught the galaxy the most important lesson in military history, that the greatest victory was not the defeat of an enemy, but the creation of a friend. And, in the depths of space, former Cathari warships flew alongside human vessels, their combined crews working together to explore new worlds, defend peaceful civilizations, and build a future worthy of the sacrifices that had made it possible. The galaxy had learned to admire something far more impressive than warships. It had learned to admire the courage to choose peace over war, cooperation over conquest, and hope over fear.
And that admiration had transformed the universe itself.